In this week's episode, we start taking a look at the offensive side of the ball and take a deep dive into pass catchers, along with some NFL updates. Welcome to the Matchup by Field Vision Sports. Our expert analysis on matchups and statistics will give you the edge in betting and on your friends. Use our insights to predict NFL outcomes like nobody else and always be the smartest guy in the room. Listen more for thoughts on the Brandon Aiyuk situation and Christian McCaffrey's Freudian slip. Whoops. After that, we dive into tight end and receiver archetypes. We all know there's many types of tight ends, but what about the receiver? And finally, listen all the way to the end for some breakout and bounce-back stars and a brief conversation about rookie pass catchers. Welcome into the Matchup by Field Vision Sports. Excited to have you with us as always. It is August 8th, a Thursday here as we record, and I'm joined by our head of football ops, Cody Alexander, the head man, Scott Bushka, and I'm your host, Sasha Bushka. Fellas, how we feeling today?
Doing great, man.
What are we, 20? Is it 28 days till football season?
Is that how many days are in 4 weeks?
Yeah. 7 times 4. Aren't we an analytics company? Yeah, 28 days. I'm fired up. We have a massive amount of momentum going on at Field Vision today. We got people subscribing to the newsletter. We got Cody putting out defensive trend articles. We got Travis Kelce unicorn posts going up. There's a lot of shit happening. So I'm fired up to talk some football.
We pulled the unicorns and aliens from the pod into the Twitterverse, into the Instagramverse. Scott, just out of curiosity off the top here, how many times a day would you say you check some sort of number that tracks how many people are following, subscribing, doing something related to Field Vision Sports?
I'm not answering that question.
That's fair.
It's my job, Sasha. Are we allowed to say shit on this podcast?
I mean, you just did, and I'm not going to edit it out, so I guess so. We just keep it to a minimum because we're not marking it explicit. But if you're under the age of 13 and you're listening to this, more power to you, first of all. You're going to be a step up on your friends when it comes to football talk at recess this year. But I guess if you have a problem with the word shit, you'll have to listen to something else. Just stay away from the F-bombs, Scott.
Okay. That's good to know because I did almost drop one at the start of this. So, okay, check.
Yeah, fair enough. We're going to dive in this week. We've got a lot of stuff planned. It's offense at Field Vision Sports this week. We're going threat ratings. We've been talking about tight ends and wide receivers on our blog, putting stuff out on the socials about that. So we'll get into breakout, bounce back, receivers. We'll get into our tops, our types of receivers, types of tight ends. But we'll start you off with some NFL news and notes around the league. Really, there's one thing going on. If you turn on NFL Network right now, chances are if you watch for more than 5 minutes, you're going to hear about Brandon Aiyuk. And that kind of fits in with our theme since we've been talking about pass catchers and receivers and things like that. So I guess we'll start with this. And it's hard to have a sense on this. And by the way, we know podcasts are recorded, so this news might already be out by the time you're listening. It'll still be worth hearing our thoughts on it. Do you guys have a sense if Aiyuk will be a 49er or somewhere else next season?
I don't think it's a great move for the 49ers, but I do think that there's a little bit of a ego on both sides involved with this. I think a lot of it with Aiyuk wanting to be paid as a number one receiver, but then also Shanahan being like, look, I can manufacture you out of this. I think he looks at it kind of like not saying Brock Purdy is like Mahomes, but just saying, look what Mahomes did when he lost Hill. You know, they were still able to produce. We feel like we have a quarterback that's one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. We feel like we'll still be able to produce with who's there. I think that's where kind of the meeting is going to happen, and someone's going to have to flinch one way or the other.
Yeah. I honestly think it's crazy if the 49ers let Aiyuk walk.
Yes.
But I agree with you that Shanahan has just a big enough ego with the offense that he's designed that he might be like, screw it. Like, I can make this thing work with anyone at receiver. I don't need Brandon Aiyuk, but I don't I cannot for the life of me, like I can't understand why they wouldn't try to pay Ayuk and try to figure out how to get out of the Debo contract. And I understand that's a little bit harder to engineer from the standpoint of like getting Debo off your hands, finding someone that can pay him, etc. But he is so clearly to me descending, and Ayuk is so clearly ascending and a more complete receiver when you talk about what he can do at all areas of the field. I was looking at this earlier. I think I posted it up on the platform X or Twitter, whatever you call it these days. But Ayuk is really, really good against man coverage. Debo, I think, was number 137 in our man coverage receiver threat ratings, which showed in the Super Bowl, right? Like Debo couldn't get off coverage against Trent McDuffie all game. So I think the Niners would be wild to trade him. But in 2 weeks ago, I would have said he's absolutely not getting traded, but it seems more and more likely by the day.
Yeah.
Cody, I'll look to you for a little insight because it's a good point that Scott makes. Like Ayuk is very good against man coverage, second in the league in threat ratings. He's also good against zone. He's top 10. He's good outside. He's good in the slot. He's good. He's good everywhere. But just taking that man coverage piece, do you think defenses are more inclined to play man or zone against Kyle Shanahan offenses?
I really think you're going to play more zone. I mean, the way that you saw it, I know that again we have recency bias with what the Chiefs did, but if you do go, and this is going to have to be a trend that we're going to have to keep an eye on early in the season. The Browns did have success running some man against them. The Chiefs had success running man. I think the issue with teams running man is how do we adjust to all the pre-snap motions? Can we handle George Kittle? There's very few defenses that have guys like the Browns, like the Chiefs, who they feel comfortable playing in man. The Chiefs kind of getting rid of Snead is a really kind of an indictment on where they sit for their secondary. They really feel like their secondary, their young guys are really good. Really, all those guys they drafted in 22. So I think that's kind of where it's at. I think, and to go to Scott's point, like you have a descending player in Debo who's very specialized in what he does, really fits in. I feel like the 49ers really don't have any leverage at this point. Like no one really wants to take that Debo contract because they're going to look at him almost like a running back. Yeah, and then Ayuk has all the leverage because they need a number one receiver. The 49ers can't really unload Debo. And then everybody knows that if they get rid of Ayuk, that they're just like kind of throwing them to the wind. So they're not going to ever recoup it. That's why I think I'm with Scott. Like you've got to figure out a way to do this and then restructure or find a trade partner for Debo.
Yeah. But ultimately, I think the way this plays out is Ayuk's going to have to play the season disgruntled because Lynch is too stupid to part ways with him for not a first round pick, right? And so, like ultimately, I think they don't find a trade partner, and he ends up playing with the Niners.
Yeah, the tough part for the Niners is too if you start looking at picks, it's like the Niners know that down the road they're going to lose some of these players because Purdy's deal's coming up and all of that. But their window is right now because they don't have to lose any of them now. And so I think, like in a perfect world, the Niners want him to just play this year, and then they might lose him after this year. But committing to him long term, giving him an extension for 4 or 5 years, it means they lose somebody else in future years. But trading him means they're building their team for future years and not building it for this year. So the best scenario for the 49ers is that he just plays the last year of his deal. He doesn't get traded or get an extension. But that's going to be a really interesting game of chicken.
Yes.
Yeah. I think, I don't know. I know the Super Bowl hangover is real. To me, the Niners have 2023 Philadelphia Eagles vibes written all over them. Like it's just like the vibes are not super good there right now.
Yeah, I also saw too, like this will be the first year Shanahan is coached and they don't have like 4 or 5 first round draft pick defensive linemen. So, I mean, I think if you see this is definitely one of those teams like that are trending down. If you would really think about it, I think you're right, spot on with the Super Bowl hangover, defensive overturns. It's hard to really equate. Like Charvarius Ward had an unreal season last year. Is he going to do the same this year? They have some other things in the secondary. How is that going to play out? But the D line really is what sets the tone on that defense. They're losing that. And so if you're sitting here like, how did this devolve into a defensive talk? Well, that's where, because it comes down to money. Right. And two, I'm also part of it. But
I think it comes down to Cody's talking. So we end up talking about defense.
But they're going to have to find ways to pay these players. And I think that they've got to make a really hard decision. They kind of bit the bullet and they paid Debo. And now they're kind of looking at Aiyuk, probably not thinking that this was going to be that hard of a sell for him to stay. And now here we are heading with literally a month to the season, and Aiyuk's trying to like bail on him.
Well, and the reality is Aiyuk broke out last year, more so than he had in any previous year. And they paid Debo before that happened. And you never know for sure what's going to happen. But even if you just look at like threat ratings, he went up by like 30% in his threat ratings from 2022 to 2023. The other thing that the Niners are combating is they do have a lot of high paid players. But by nature, if you have a lot of high paid players, that means they're not on their rookie contracts and they're getting older. Mm-hmm. And players don't generally get better as they age. Like maybe the first couple of years you're just coming into your own, but once you hit like year 3 and you're peaked out, you either stay the same or you get worse. And I think the only thing the Niners can do to combat that is Brock Purdy's only entering his 3rd year, so he could still be ascending. He could be getting better as the other players are descending. And that'll be interesting to see like what strides Brock Purdy takes this year, especially if they trade Brandon Aiyuk, because it's going to be more about Purdy and less about the weapons if you start losing those weapons.
Yep, 100%.
Just on a lighter note, we did show prep, so you guys know of this, but I don't know if either of you saw it. They were asking Christian McCaffrey about the Aiyuk situation yesterday, and he I would call it a Freudian slip, not to get too psychological with you guys, but he basically called him a former teammate. He was like, anytime you have a guy who's a former teammate, you support him. And then he was like, well, I guess like current one or the other, like he stumbled all over it. Is that like, I'll ask it this way. Do you think McCaffrey like has any sort of conversations with Niners brass, John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, where that came out that way because of that? Or do you think it's just kind of a general accident?
I think it was a slip. Like I listened to it and I think it was a slip, unintentional. I also think players, because they've all done this, don't harbor any ill will to other players for like trying to get their money. But in general, it just contributes to like an overall not great vibe down there, down there in Santa Clara.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like it's one of those where I think. No, do I think McCaffrey's having conversations with John Lynch about player personnel decisions? No, but I think that locker room knows what's going on, probably better than anybody, even journalists. So it's like I think that is kind of where they're at. If Aiyuk's telling everybody I'm out, and he's very adamant about it, they probably know it better, and that's probably where that slip came from.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you guys are saying. It's just an interesting timing on a slip up.
It really is.
It's 4 weeks until the season, as Scott so eloquently pointed out at the beginning of the pod. Yeah, I know. I like that word too. So what that means is real preseason starts this week. It's the first week. Some teams are playing starters for a little bit. Some aren't playing them at all. It can be kind of boring. Do either of you have like any preseason game in particular that you're interested in, looking forward to, player you want to see, anything like that?
The only preseason week I'm interested in is week 2, because no one plays in week 3.
Right.
Week 1 is generally just people screwing around. To me, the most interesting thing to see in the preseason, if they play, are the rookie quarterbacks.
Yes.
And in week 2, the game that I was looking at that I highlighted that I thought could be super interesting is Atlanta at Baltimore. Um, and I think that's interesting for a couple of different reasons. One, we might see Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix, and everything out of Atlanta camp seems to say that like Michael Penix looks amazing, which is not super surprising, right? Like he is a mature quarterback coming in out of college relative to like other QBs that are drafted in the first round. So we might get to see both of those teams, but also they're playing the Ravens, who are notorious for taking preseason serious. So what was it until they lost to the whoa I
Commanders.
almost called them the Redskins
Well,
until
kind of
they
did.
yeah until, let me guess, you're not going to edit that out either. um until they lost to the Commanders at the end of last preseason, the Ravens had won like 23 straight preseason games. So they're going to try. So I'm interested to see what Penix, Cousins, Drake London, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, that whole crew does under a new regime in Atlanta.
Yeah. In fact, Scott, I was going to say the exact same game. If you look at the slate, kind of
Boom.
the yeah. I mean, really, that's the thing about the first week of the preseason game is like it's really just you really get an opportunity to see the draft picks. I think that's where a lot of the draft nick guys love the first week and love the third week because then you can really see those draft pick guys. Like you said, the rookie quarterbacks. I would say Chicago, but we know that they're probably not going to play Caleb Williams at all during the preseason. I'm interested to see what Raheem Morris is going to do. Jimmy Lake is back, just kind of in control of the defense. He hasn't done that since he was with the University of Washington. So I'm interested to see in that general, what is the Ravens defense going to look like? Just remember, in preseason, you're essentially seeing their base, right? What are they installing day one? What's that going to look like? So I'm interested to see kind of what that's going to look like from the Ravens. And then obviously I'm really interested in the Falcons offense. I think that to me, what is that going to look like? It's such a departure from what Arthur Smith was trying to run, kind of with that McVay system. What is that going to look like with all those weapons that they do have? And then how are they going to plan on utilizing them?
Yeah. Let me ask you guys this. Like, and we don't know for sure what's going to happen with Caleb Williams in terms of preseason play and all of that, but how do you reconcile a guy who's never played an NFL snap not taking a single snap in the preseason versus like the Chiefs have already come out and said Mahomes is playing the first quarter in the first preseason game? And I know Andy Reid's kind of old school, and that might be where that comes from. But don't you think a rookie QB should at least get his feet wet a little bit before week one?
Did the Bears come out and say Caleb Williams isn't playing in the preseason at all?
I don't think they've said that. Cody just indicated that he didn't think he thought he might not play in the preseason at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to argue with guys like Andy Reid and guys like John Harbaugh's philosophy because they work, because those are consistently two of the best teams in the NFL. But I realize that injury is a risk in the preseason for sure, but injury is also a risk in week 1, 2, 3, all the way through 18.
Yeah.
And like you got to get these dudes prepared to play. So I know the trend, the like modern trend has been players don't play at all in the preseason. I don't agree with it. And I definitely, Sasha, to your point, do not agree with it with a rookie who's never played an NFL snap. Like you're basically asking, which it might present a good betting opportunity for Field Vision and the Field Vision, subscribers. But like if you're trotting Caleb Williams out there, rookie quarterback, week 1, never take a snap, like I'm probably betting against him.
We'll make a quick correction immediately following a statement. Caleb Williams to make NFL preseason debut for Bears versus Bills. Starters will play. So
There you go.
Thank you, Google machine. And then I'll just mark that as the preseason game I'm looking forward to then. Bears, Bills. And
that's a good one.
I will say, like, I don't care what we see out of Mahomes on Saturday night when the Chiefs make their preseason debut, but with a whole new cast of pass catchers, it'll be interesting to see some things from there too with the starters playing in that game. So interesting stuff. Week 1 of preseason. You're a savage if you get super into preseason. Like, more power to you. You're a football fanatic. I love it. Like, I can imagine you're like, we'll put you on the Cody Alexander scale if you're watching like preseason film and breaking it down. But nonetheless, we have to touch on it. We're gonna
Is
go to a
is
quick break. On the other side, we'll get into pass catchers, threat rate, receivers, tight ends, unicorns, everything you could ever want. You're listening to The Matchup by Field Vision Sports. Stay with us.
Use our insights to predict NFL outcomes like nobody else and always be the smartest guy in the room.
Welcome back in to The Matchup by Field Vision Sports. We're excited to be with you on Thursday, August 8th, 28 days until football season. We're talking receivers, threat rate, getting you ready for the preseason, everything you need to know. And Scott's had something just burning to say for a couple of minutes now, so I'll let him get to that.
It's not burning. I just wanted to, Cody, I presume that Bo is glued to the preseason screen.
Yeah.
Like Sunday mornings, pushing sleds around the living room.
Yeah, no, my middle son is the football fanatic. He's already, if there's football on and it's new football, we're gonna probably watch it sometime in the morning.
I do have a question on like the Alexander household from a it's an academic standpoint.
Yeah.
Do you have like vocabulary tests weekly on like defensive nomenclature, like words that you say that they should know what it means, and they have to score like at least an 85% to eat dinner that week?
You'd be surprised how pretty chill I am about that. But no, we're not doing vocabulary tests over football terms. I don't have a playbook that I'm giving it to him. I'm pretty chill dad when it comes to
He's
that.
full of shit. Did you hear his story about his new fridge? New fridge acts as a whiteboard, and he's decided he can write football plays on the fridge, which Mrs. Alexander is not that thrilled about. But yeah, Cody likes it because he can draw plays for his 6-year-old kids.
Yeah, I was told no, that is not happening.
Dude, I'd love to see those X's and O's. Speaking of X's and O's, let's dive into the pass catcher talk a little bit. We'll start. We started our rankings. We released receivers first, and then we did tight ends. But I want to start this conversation with tight ends because it's kind of a unique position. Obviously, they get a lot of glamour for their pass catching, and but there's another job involved with being a tight end. In terms of run blocking, helping in pass protection, that sort of thing. It's kind of a dual threat position. So, Cody, why don't you just break down a little bit about like the different types of tight ends and what people can expect to see out of different guys?
Yeah, so there's 3 different tight ends if you break it down. You have a Y, or which is your traditional tight end. This would a great example of this. The best one would be George Kittle. He is just as good as blocking as he is as receiving. He's going to be on the ball. I mean, he's going to be on the line. He's going to be right next to a tackle most of the time. Then you have what are called a flex. A flex tight end would be like your Hawkinson, your Kelsey. Kelsey's obviously the best one out of that. And this is one of those guys that's a big body receiver. He's going to be flexed out most of the time. They'll put him in a by one situation where he's by himself. They'll move him around to try and get matchups. He's typically going to be off the ball, or if he's on the ball, he's going to be flexed out. And then finally, you do need an H-back. And all an H-back is, it goes all the way back to the 1980s with the LT days. Gibbs with the Redskins came up with the position because he needed an extra guy to block LT to allow his online tight end to then go down the field and go catch passes. And so these are your third tight end types. They can moonlight as a fullback if you need them to. They're usually slotted. The Chiefs gray is a great example of that. So you have Kelsey if you put him on the line or you flex him out, and then you have kind of that other tight end. He's really more of a blocker, but can catch the ball. He moves around, athletic guy, and kind of a hybrid. That's where you get the 3 different types.
Okay. Now let me follow up on that. Like, obviously, you look at these teams, if you have George Kittle or Travis Kelsey, they're your main tight end, right? And so the Chiefs are running tight end flex a lot. The Niners are using a Y a lot. But in terms of roster building, do teams feel like they need to carry like all 3 types just for different situations? Or do some teams carry all Ys, all flexes? I would imagine you wouldn't carry all H's, but do teams feel like they need at least one of the 3 out of the 3 or 4 tight ends they have? or do some teams kind of double down on one type of tight end?
Yeah, you can carry two Ys, but if you can have a Y and a flex, I think the Bills are a great example of this. You have a Kincaid and a Knox. Knox is more or your flex guy. Kincaid's kind of in line with what a traditional tight end would be. You want to have two guys. What you don't want to get in a situation is like if you're the Jaguars and you have Ingram and then you have another Ingram and you have two flex guys, nobody can really block. So when you go into 12 personnel, you're just getting blitzed because they know you're not going to block or you're going to go 5 out. And so I think that's kind of the situation that you run into. The 49ers have a true fullback. And so if you have a true fullback, you can kind of get away with not having an H or even a flex tight end. You want to have a really good Y, but you typically want to have both.
Would you say, and I'll let Scott jump in here in a second, but would you say Juszczyk, obviously that's the 49ers true fullback that you're referring to, could he almost be considered an H? Like he's really just an extension of the tight end room, or do you see him as just a traditional fullback?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think he's kind of one of those hybrid players that can play. He can play the H. He can play fullback. You really could, if you really wanted to, you could probably call him an H back, and I don't think anybody would really argue with that.
Scott, are you mesmerized by this tight end talk?
Yeah, I was just like, I've been really outspoken about not only Travis Kelce being the GOAT of all tight ends, but also how much that I think it's ridiculous to put George Kittle on the same level as him in terms of tight ends. But I do think Kittle being able to both block and catch passes effectively allows the 49ers the flexibility to have a level of surprise when he's on the field. That last year I think was the first year where, and I don't think it's because Kelce can't block. I think it's because they are at this point in his career, very consciously trying to save his legs. The Chiefs basically did not have him in the game on running downs, right? And it pretty much telegraphs to teams they're going to run. Kelce comes into the game. Now we're going to pass. And I think last year was the first year where that lack of flexibility for Kelce hurt the Chiefs in terms of being a tell for defenses in terms of what they were going to do on offense. So, a true tight end that can do both catch passes and blocks gives teams a level of flexibility that some of these other more flex tight ends don't.
Yeah, for sure. And there's different ways to deploy them. If you look at our tight end rankings, there was a mixture of all different types of tight ends that kind of rose to the top in the top 10. But there's really 5 or 6 tight ends that are difference makers in the passing game that you could put them on any team and they would use them effectively in the passing game and they would add to their offense. And everybody else, they're kind of interchangeable parts. If you look from Dalton Schultz to Cole Kmet, Dalton Kincaid, Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill is kind of a different category, but
yeah,
Kyle Pitts, Greg Dulcich, Dallas Goedert, Hunter Henry, Tyler Conklin, David Njoku. That's kind of going through from 8 to 20 on our list. Is there a big separation in any of those guys, or does it just kind of depend on how the teams deploy them?
I think it depends on how the team deploys them. I mean, even you really look at it Njoku is that's a flex tight end. You've got Hunter Henry's more in line with a regular tight end. Dallas Goedert's a regular tight end. It's a nice little mix, but like you said, if you're going to do it by tiers, there's really no difference once you get past probably Evan Ingram at 5. Our top 6 is pretty much those are by far the best tight ends in the NFL. And then it's kind of everybody else kind of has that guy that's pretty good. And then it's just hopefully we use him correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I might disagree a little bit in terms of especially at the tight end position, there's not every team has a tight end that can get open every play as effectively as these top 6 guys, right? Which when we did the rankings, we're staring at them being okay, Kelce, Hawkinson, Kittle, Andrews, Laporta, Ingram. That feels like its own unique tier, and I would put those tight ends into a tier of guys who can get open every play, which means the quarterback can feed them the ball on a more consistent basis than almost everyone else on the list. There's two guys when I was looking at this list that I would say like very easily could jump up into that top tier. Trey McBride in Arizona, and then I know I'm not the only person, but I really like Jake Ferguson in Dallas. And I think especially this year, you could see him take another big jump because Dallas is especially if they don't get CeeDee Lamb back playing, but Dallas is short on playmakers, and he's a really good pass catching tight end.
See, I thought you were going to say a different name because I feel like Ferguson falls into that category of like he could move up in the rankings because Dallas uses the tight end, but you could substitute out like a lot of these other guys on the list and they would do the same thing. I thought you were going to say, and I agree with Trey McBride, I thought you were going to say Dalton Kincaid.
That too, yeah.
Just because he's going into his second year and the Bills are bereft of weapons as well. So they're going to have to use him somehow.
Well, the word is they're going to go 12 personnel too a lot. And I just feel like, and then you add the quarterback run game into that, and that's just so dirty. And it opens up. He has the opportunity to join that kind of upper echelon this year. I agree with you, Sasha.
Yeah.
Sasha, you clearly haven't seen Keon Coleman catching touchdowns on air every day in training camp.
Wait, would catching touchdowns on air basically mean like you're standing in the place that's deemed an end zone and you catch a football? So it's basically no different than just catching a football anywhere.
Right.
It does. I mean, there's no defender playing, but
it gets people going.
Yeah, maybe you should check that with the data science team.
Yeah, the data science team is hard at work figuring out which of these offensive players is threatening and working hard on the matchup index, which when the app launches, you guys will be fired up about out there. Let's shift off tight ends for a little bit. I think it's pretty obvious to people that there's different types of tight ends. But there's also like archetypes when it comes to receivers, and people don't think about that as much. I mean, sure, some guys line up in the slot, some guys line up outside, some guys move around a lot. But just talk to us, wax poetically, Cody, about the different types of receivers and how that looks in terms of what they can do in an offense.
Yeah, so we'll start outside. This is going to be the traditional outside receiver. The best two examples of that in our threat rate are going to be Justin Jefferson and Nico Collins. These guys are big. They're tall. They're really good route runners. They can go up. They can play on the sideline. I think that's the biggest thing. And that's probably the first thing when you say receiver, that's what people are going to think of. Then we have kind of the last 10 years, we have the rise of the slot position, but I don't think people necessarily understand that there's kind of two different slot types. You have a power slot, which is more or less like CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb's 6'2", he's over 200 pounds. He is going to be difficult for a nickel defender to handle. And then if you want to go big nickel and put a safety on top of him, he's just going to smoke him. And that's really why he's a production monster. I think we all know that. And then you have like true slots. This would be your St. Brown's, and this would be your Christian Kirk. And I know like people probably, when we were talking about this before the show, like Christian Kirk got paid, and people are like, why is he getting paid so much? And he's getting paid because he's the engine to that offense. The offense for the Jaguars does not run if the slot is not producing. And so I think that that's kind of where people don't understand with a guy like Christian Kirk is in that slot, he opens up so many things for that offense by playing underneath and just kind of running those crossing routes. It's the same thing that we get with St. Brown. So to me, that's what I think a lot of people understand that as like, that's what a slot is. But I don't think people really assume like CeeDee Lamb as like a power slot. He's a big receiver that can play inside.
Cody, what's your point of view on the value of a true slot relative to like a true X receiver? And what I'm getting at is I hear a lot of people talking about, so Amon-Ra St. Brown by the numbers was a top 5 or 6 receiver in the league for sure last year, right? But he does most of his work out of the slot. He does most of his work short, underneath in the zone. He's not like threatening defenses a ton downfield. And in general, the take is like, even though he produces at the level of these other more traditional X receivers, we don't think it's as valuable. in terms of like what we would pay him contract wise. And so I'm just curious your point of view in like modern NFL offenses. Should we discount guys that play in the slot versus true receivers that play outside?
I do. I think that that's true. And really, I think anymore what we're getting to is we're getting to an added value. Okay. Like we've heard this year, like Justin Jefferson, they're going to try and move him around. The Cowboys will tell you, right now, hey, CeeDee Lamb does not just play in the slot, and they're right. And so I think that is not necessarily like being a slot doesn't undervalue. It's, do you add value somewhere else? Can we line you up outside and can you win? If you can't, then it's going to be really difficult. And that's why I think there's still always, it's the same argument for corner. Like if you can't play man coverage at corner, you can't really be considered a top corner. You can be the best zone corner in the NFL, but if you can't play man at a high level, you're not going to be considered a top corner. I think it's the same thing at receiver. If you can't play outside 100% of the downs and win, then it's going to be really difficult for you to be considered. And then we're going to fork over all that money. I do think that there is a little bit of a market deficiency. I think slot is a little bit underrated, but we're also seeing this with CeeDee Lamb, who is the number one slot in the NFL. He's going to break the bank. And why is that? Because he can also go outside.
Yeah. It's interesting the insights you can pull out of like our threat ratings as well as like there's a misconception sometimes with slots that like they only do their damage underneath and against zone and that sort of thing. Amon-Ra St. Brown, just for example, he was third in the league in threat rating out of the slot, but also top 5 in both short intermediate routes and deep threat. Deep threat rating. He's actually I wasn't going to point this out because I didn't want to throw anyone under the bus, but he was our number one receiver in the league in deep threat rating. Amon-Ra St. Brown. So it just kind of like sometimes just breaking the numbers up like this can eliminate some misconceptions that you might have about a player just by looking at like where they line up pre-snap.
I mean, that's really and Sasha, now that I'm totally fine you throwing me under the bus, now that I'm looking at that spreadsheet, I see that, but that is definitely not people's perception of what St. Brown's doing on the field. And quite frankly, like I've looked at Jared Goff's numbers and he like crushes the short and intermediate part of the field. He doesn't do a lot of work deep, which means that like the only person that's catching any balls deep in Detroit is St. Brown. But yeah, you're right. You're right. He's
the other interesting thing about St. Brown getting the contract and everything this offseason, he's an ascending asset for sure. He's climbed consistently over his first 3 years in terms of threat rating. So I do want to shift the conversation a little bit, just in accounting for time here, because we want to get into breakout and bounce back players at the end, kind of like we did last week. But just real quick, man and zone. We've gone over when we were talking about defense that more defenses are shifting to zone in today's league. And our number one threat rating receiver was Justin Jefferson. And he's also number one at beating zone coverage. But you also like it's the cat analogy that Cody's used. My cat's better than your cat. You want a guy who, when he lines up against someone one-on-one, is going to win. So what do you think's more important in today's NFL, being really good against zone coverage or just being the better cat and being able to beat man coverage?
I think that it's really more or less like the mentality of the players have had to shift. I think that if you're I think we're seeing this in some of these guys like a DK Metcalf, who was just a straight line runner, big physical outside receiver. He's gonna be lower on your list, and I think we're seeing that. People don't consider him maybe even a top 10 receiver, and that's just because he's a true outside straight line guy. I think in two, man versus zone, what happens if he comes up with a DB that can run with him, or is as big and physical as he is, and then he kind of disappears a little bit at times, and that's where to me the man versus zone kind of aspect comes into it. Zone, to me, if you're really good at zone, you're finding the spot, you know what everybody else around you is doing. You're able to read in real time and react to the coverage in real time and find that window. I think a lot of times too, zone is also a lot on the offensive coordinator. Because if it's man, it's just like, dude, beat your guy, and we know we're going to throw it to you. Whereas in zone, it's, are we calling the right plays? Are we predicting where that zone is going to be? And so that's where that finding. But what you want, and Sasha, you pointed this out, if you're a top receiver, you need to be good at both.
I was surprised in our numbers to see that Justin Jefferson wasn't top 10 or even top 20 when you look at him versus man. I think the reality to the answer to that question, Sasha, is kind of a math problem, right? Which is that based on everything Cody's told us about the trend towards zone, most teams are playing zone anywhere between 70 to 80% of the game, right? If you have a guy who's really good against zone, that's what they're facing 70 to 80% of the time, right? Like, sure, it's nice to have a guy who's incredible against man, but if that guy's less good against the defense that they're playing 80% of the game, like that person's probably less valuable. What to me, the interesting question is if we continue to see the trend move that way on the defensive side of the ball, because obviously what teams are trying to do is stop explosives, right? Like you play man coverage, you're one-on-one over Tyreek Hill, you expose yourself to my cat being better than your cat and a 70-yard touchdown happening. That's why they're playing more zone. The question is if we see that trend reverse as teams just pick people apart, 7 to 10 yards at a time in the middle of the field.
Yeah. And I don't have any stats to back this up, and it might not be accounted for in the numbers. Nothing can be perfect. But like if you look at a guy like Justin Jefferson, he's been largely considered known as the best receiver in the NFL for a few years now. And so if they do face man coverage and you're the Vikings, he's probably bracketed 95% of the time that man coverage gets played against the Vikings, with two players guarding him. So that could be a little bit hidden in the numbers as well.
Actually, Sasha, I did a study on this last year. I haven't ran the numbers on it this year, but him and CeeDee Lamb actually saw the most bracket coverage per game last year. I think he had it almost like 3 snaps a game where he was getting bracket coverage. So I do agree with you on that. And that's really too that's what I think is so fascinating about Justin Jefferson is that he's getting doubled. Why are teams running zone against him? Well, because we can get a zone double on him. That's a lot of times you see that. And so even in that, he's finding ways to be explosive. And I think that to me is really indicative of how good he is as a receiver.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's finish with this, guys. I'm gonna kind of group them. If you want to give more than one guy, feel free. But I'll start with Scott because I don't think he's got enough words in edgewise today. A breakout or bounce back receiver or tight end. We'll throw all pass catchers in there, based on a new situation or new circumstances for this year.
Yeah, I'm gonna. So Sasha, I took a little page out of your book. Went to the threat rating, tried to take a look at who maybe made a big jump or had a big drop off, 22 to 23 in their threat ratings. For my bounce back player, I'm going with T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. And so you've got a bunch of things going on. So I was thinking about this morning. This time last year, if you would have asked us who's the better receiver, Brandon Aiyuk or T. Higgins, I don't think there would have been a debate at all. Like I think all three of us would have said T. Higgins. You fast forward a year later, and it's almost the exact opposite. We would all say Brandon Aiyuk, but this guy has like huge potential. He's put up big numbers. He had a huge year, 106 raw threat rating in 2022. In 2021, 91 raw threat rating in 2022. Then it drops off to 60 last year. He wants a new contract. He's going to play that as a disgruntled player. He's in a contract year. He's bound to have a big year. Burrow, in theory, it feels like he's got a chip on his shoulder. Jamar Chase hasn't been practicing. He's holding out. So I just think the dynamics set up for T. Higgins to come show the world that he actually is that kind of like true elite X receiver that everyone thought he was back in 21-22.
Yeah. Yeah, I had Higgins on my fantasy team last year, and so I can tell you I paid close attention to what was going on with him. It was a bit of a like cat and mouse back and forth game where like he was hurt, then he'd take a while to like work back in, and then he'd get into form, and then Burrow was hurt, and then he's playing with a backup, and then when Burrow would come back, he was hurt. So like he just never gained the momentum. He had like one good game in the overlap when he was healthy, and Burrow was starting to get into form, and then Burrow broke his wrist or whatever he did, and that kind of ended his season. So I definitely think that's a good call out.
Yeah, I like Higgins. He was definitely on my list. I think Cooper Kupp's going to probably have a good season. He is trending downwards, so like that's not why I wouldn't put my name on him right now. But I do think the one guy to look at is Marquise Brown, someone who had a really good 2022. We all know the chaos of the Cardinals, but I think he fits what the Chiefs really want. So if we're going to use a 49ers analogy that we started off with, he's basically the Aiyuk to Rice's Debo for the Chiefs. Rice, right? And Scott, we talked about sport. We actually had a heat map of Rice and put it next to Debo, and it's almost like looking at twins.
They're the same player.
They're the same player.
He was Debo as a rookie, which is kind of crazy.
Right.
Rice also can't separate against man like Debo.
Right. So I think Marquise Brown, everyone's making a big deal about Xavier Worthy, but as we know about receivers, especially rookie receivers, it's a literal crapshoot of what they are going to do in the first year. So let's just throw him out. I really think Marquise Brown's going to be able to blow the top off of defenses, and they're going to be able to kind of play with Kelsey and Rice underneath, which is going to pull people down, which is just going to open that up. We already know Mahomes can throw the ball deep. He's just waiting for that opportunity. So I think the Chiefs actually are primed to let him have. I think he has 1,000-yard receiving year this year.
Yeah, I like that call out. And like as far as Worthy goes, the Chiefs' offense is complex, and like we have never seen a rookie in the Chiefs system under Andy Reid, and this might go back to his Eagles days too. I don't have all the research on that, but we've never seen a rookie come in and just light it up out of the gates. Rashee Rice had a good year last year, but it was mostly second half of the season.
Mm-hmm.
It took him a while to get going.
I like that. I like that pick, Cody. I think it's a good call. In general, I think the Chiefs' offense is set up for a bit of a bounce back explosion.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree too. Let's have just a quick conversation, and I'll throw out a name. I think like Jalen Waddle was kind of hit and miss last year, and his 2022 was better than his 2023. Tyreek Hill's all locked up. Waddle's all locked up. Tua's got his contract. Everything's kind of in place for like the Dolphins to have a true hierarchy on offense. And I think like Devon Achan's probably not going to break off like a 50-yard run every time he touches the ball this year, which will open up for some more explosives for Jalen Waddle as well. Real quick, one thing that we don't look at in our threat ratings because it's based on NFL data and NFL production is rookie wide receivers. So just a few quick thoughts on rookies that could have an impact and how you look at rookie wide receivers in terms of production at the NFL level.
Yeah, I'll go first on this one. I think, I'll just go thumbs up, thumbs down. I'll make it really easy. Guys that I think are going to have production right now, I think Marvin Harris Jr., I think he's going to be the number one receiver. He's got, and I literally just said you never know about rookie receivers, but if there is a receiver that is coming into the NFL that reminds you of like Larry Fitzgerald, it's Marvin Harris Jr. I mean, he ticks all the boxes. I think Malik Nabers is going to have a unique opportunity with the Giants to be the number one receiver from the very beginning. And then I also think Brian Thomas with the Jaguars. Those guys are my three yeses. I think the Jaguars too in that system, very much like the Chiefs, he's going to find voids. I think Kirk underneath running those shallow routes is going to pull people down. The guys I kind of have a thumbs down on, I'm waiting to see. Everybody's high on McConkey. Greg Roman has kind of proven, and then also with Harbaugh wanting to run the ball as much as he wants to, I just don't see a number 3 receiver or kind of that power slot guy really producing a lot. And then Keon Coleman, I'm going to wait and see on Keon Coleman. I don't know how fast he is. And I think big receivers that play hero ball in college don't necessarily always translate to the NFL.
Yeah. The one thing I would disagree with you on, Cody, is Malik Neighbors, just because he has Daniel Jones throwing to him. And I have almost zero confidence in Daniel Jones in that offense getting the ball to him. It's less of a comment about his talent, him as a receiver. I do like the fact that he's getting in fights with the Detroit Lions secondary, like every practice that they play again. So he's got some fire to him. The person that you did not mention, which I think outside of Marvin Harrison Jr., which is kind of hard to say he's more pro ready than him because that dude has literally been like running routes with NFL teams since he was like 3. Rome Odunze might be the best setup from a situation in terms of like he's got 2 almost like 1A and 1B receivers next to him. So in theory, like he should have your third best DB and get a lot of opportunities and a lot of looks to be successful. It just kind of depends like how much they throw the ball around.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting because Rome Odunze, I think, has a lot of talent, but coming in as the third option, I don't know if that works in your favor or against you. And Malik Neighbors, he has all the talent in the world, and he's clear-cut the Giants' number 1 option. So, yes, Daniel Jones is a problem, but the Giants have had guys break out at times. The problem is they've just always had like 6 different receivers that you can't really separate the difference of. Dan Campbell, his quote about Malik Neighbors after the practice, like the joint practices, he's a mix of Chase and Jefferson, but has the overall dog mentality of prime OBJ. I'd be shocked if he didn't win Offensive Rookie of the Year.
Another LSU receiver. They just produce them. It's a factory. It's insane.
That's I didn't see that quote from Dan Campbell, but it's not at all what I expected you to say after he was like fighting with. I thought he was going to say like, if Neighbors comes after my players again, I'll bite his kneecap off or something like that. So it's highly complimentary. He's really maturing in his older age.
Dan Campbell's a stallion. Like, by the way, like the bravado, we've talked about this before, Scott. Like the bravado is great, but there's some mental capacity going on underneath all that with Dan Campbell. Like he's truly a good coach. And knows what
he's playing dumber than he is.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, for sure. What do you say we wrap, guys? You good with what we put out today?
I love it.
I feel great about it. That was fun.
Yeah, I think that's enough for the people on a Friday when this comes out. You've been listening to the Matchup by Field Vision Sports. Follow us on X at Field Vision MI, at Field Vision Sports on Instagram. Check out TikTok. Go to fieldvisionsports.com as well. Join the movement. Join our newsletter. Go to the website. Type in your email address. You've been listening to the Matchup by Field Vision Sports. Thanks for listening. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. We appreciate you joining the movement that is Field Vision Sports, the analytics platform built specifically for you, the fan. We look forward to taking you through this football season and beyond. And be sure to tell all your friends.